You are always busy, but rarely present. And I want you to sit with that for a moment before I explain anything. Because right now, even as you are listening to this, some part of you is somewhere else. Your body is here, your ears are here, but your mind has already drifted to that one thing you need to do later, that conversation you replayed in the shower, that task sitting open in a tab you promised yourself you would close, that message you have not replied to in 3 days. You are here, and you are not here. And the strange thing is, this has become so normal to you that you no longer notice it. You only notice it in those rare, uncomfortable seconds of stillness, when you sit somewhere quiet and suddenly feel nothing, or worse, something unnamed and heavy that you immediately move to escape. So you pick up your phone, or you make a plan, or you tell yourself you are tired and you will deal with it tomorrow. But tomorrow, you are busy again. This is where I want to start. Not with philosophy, not with a concept, with that specific moment you know very well. You are sitting at dinner. The food is in front of you. Someone is talking, and you are nodding. You are saying the right words at the right times, but you are not there. You are solving something in your head, or you are worried about something that has not happened yet, or you are somewhere between 3 different thoughts that are pulling you in 3 different directions, and the meal ends, and you do not remember what it tasted like. You were present in body, absent in everything else. Now, most people would call this stress. They would call it being overwhelmed. They would say, I have too much going on. And they would be partly right, but only partly. Because what I want to show you is something deeper than stress, something older than overwhelm. This is not a problem with your schedule. This is a problem with your nafs. And if you do not know what that word means yet, do not worry. You are about to feel it, because the nafs is not a foreign concept. It is not a religious term that floats somewhere above your life. The nafs is you. Or more precisely, the nafs is the part of you that has been running your life while you thought you were in control. Let me show you what I mean. You wake up in the morning. Before you even open your eyes fully, before you have said a word, before you have had a single conscious thought, your mind is already moving. It is already calculating. It is already sorting through what needs to happen today. And you do not choose this. It just happens. Like an engine that turns on the moment the key touches the ignition, and you call this being productive. You call this being responsible. You call this being a person who has their life together. But there is a question that almost nobody asks. Who started the engine? You did not decide to start thinking the moment you woke up. You did not choose anxiety as your morning companion, but it arrived. It arrives every morning, and it will keep arriving, because something inside you is always running, always computing, always in motion. The nafs does not rest. That is the first thing to understand, and I do not mean this symbolically. The nafs, as it is described in Islamic understanding, is the seat of desire, impulse, and self-preservation. It is the part of you that is always seeking, always calculating what is safe and what is threatening, what is pleasurable and what is painful, what brings gain and what risks loss. It never stops, because the moment it stopped, something in you would feel like it was dying. And here is the thing, your busyness is not separate from this. Your busyness is this. When people say they are too busy, they imagine busyness as something external, something that happened to them, a life that filled up with too many things. But what if that is not what happened? What if you filled it? What if some part of you chose the noise? Not consciously, not deliberately, but chose it nonetheless. Because noise is safe, silence is where you hear yourself. Think about what happens when you have nothing to do, when the schedule is clear, when there is nowhere to be, nothing due, nobody waiting. For a few minutes it is nice, and then something shifts. A restlessness begins, a vague discomfort, and you start reaching for something to do, something to check, something to plan. Not because it needs to be done right now, but because stillness started to feel like danger. This is the Nafs protecting itself, because the Nafs knows something. It knows that in true stillness, you start to see things, you start to feel things. Questions that have no comfortable answers begin to surface. Questions like, is this the life I actually want? Am I becoming who I said I would become? Do the people close to me actually know me? Or do they know the version of me that I perform for them? Why does accomplishing something never feel the way I thought it would feel? These questions do not come when you are busy. Busyness is the Nafs's greatest defense mechanism, and this is the disruption I need you to sit with. Because most people think of busyness as a failure of time management. They think if I just organized my day better, planned more efficiently, used the right system, I would finally have peace. And so they buy planners and download apps and set routines. And for a few days it works. And then they are busy again. A different kind of busy, but busy. Because the problem was never the schedule. The problem was what the schedule was hiding. Now I want to introduce you to something that sits alongside the Nafs. Something that the Nafs is always in tension with. The Qalb, the heart, but not the heart that pumps blood. The heart that is the center of your spiritual and emotional awareness. The Qalb is the part of you that knows, not in the way the mind knows, calculating and reasoning and comparing. The Qalb knows in a different way. It knows when something is wrong before the mind can explain it. It knows when a relationship has shifted before a word has been spoken. It knows when you are lying to yourself, even as you construct a very convincing argument for why you are not. The Qalb feels the truth before the mind accepts it. And this is important, because right now in your life, there is likely something your Qalb already knows, something it has been quietly signaling for months, maybe longer. A direction you are not moving in, a version of yourself that is slowly becoming unreachable. A relationship that is growing thin at the edges because neither person is fully present. An agreement you made with yourself that you have been quietly abandoning, one small compromise at a time. Your Qalb knows, but the Nafs is louder, and so you stay busy, you stay occupied. You fill the space between what you know and what you are willing to see with tasks and notifications and plans and conversations and content. Not because you are lazy, not because you are broken, but because the Nafs is very skilled at making avoidance feel like productivity. Let me say that again. The Nafs is very skilled at making avoidance feel like productivity. You feel like you are doing something. You feel like you are working towards something. You are moving, you are responding, you are planning, but underneath all that movement, you are standing still. And somewhere in the Qalb, you know it. This is what I mean when I say you are always busy but rarely present. Presence is not about being in the room. Presence is about being available. Available to the moment. Available to what is actually happening inside you. Available to the people around you without a part of your mind already 2 hours ahead of where you are standing. Most people have never experienced this kind of presence, not for more than a few seconds. Because the moment a true silence opens up, the Nafs floods the space with thoughts, with plans, with worries, with replays of past conversations, with rehearsals of future ones, with an endless rolling current of mental activity that never stops and never arrives anywhere. And you have come to identify with that current. You have come to believe that you are the thoughts, that you are the plans, that you are the productivity, that you are the person who replies quickly and manages well and keeps everything moving. But who are you when the movement stops? This is not a trick question. This is the question that the Nafs is most afraid of, because if you sat with it long enough, truly sat with it without reaching for a distraction, you might find something unexpected. you might find that beneath all that noise, there is something very quiet. And that quiet is not emptiness. It is the opposite of emptiness. It is the Ruh, the spirit, the deepest layer of what you are, the part of you that is not constructed by habit or trauma or social expectation or the relentless pressure of a world that rewards busyness and punishes stillness. The Ruh is not something you build. It is not something you achieve. It is not something you become. It is already there. It has always been there. But it is so quiet that the noise of the Nafs drowns it completely. And here is something that very few people consider. The Ruh does not become louder when you try harder. It becomes audible when you become still. And this is why presence is not a skill. It is not a technique. It is not something you schedule or practice in a structured way. Presence is what happens when the Nafs finally stops dominating the internal space, when the constant production of thoughts and plans and worries slows, even briefly, and something underneath becomes perceptible. This is not a spiritual luxury. This is a psychological necessity, because without it, something starts to erode. I want you to think about the last time you were fully in a conversation with someone you love, not performing conversation, not waiting for your turn to speak, not mentally composing your response while the other person is still talking, but genuinely in it, listening, receiving, actually present with that person in that moment. When was that? If you are honest, you will find that it has been a while. And not because you love them less, but because some part of your mind is always elsewhere, and they sense it even if they do not say it, and you sense their sensing of it even if you pretend you do not. Relationships do not break suddenly. They hollow out slowly. Through 1,000 moments of half-presence, 1,000 conversations where two bodies were in the same room, but two minds were somewhere completely different. This is what busyness costs you. Not time, connection. And the tragedy is that you are working so hard, running so fast, staying so occupied, often for the people you are simultaneously becoming unavailable to. You are building a life for them while being absent from the life they are actually living with you right now, in this moment, in today. The Nafs tells you that the work now is for the peace later, but the Qalb knows that later never comes in the way you imagine it will, because when you arrive at later, the Nafs finds a new reason to be busy, a new thing to solve, a new distance to cross, and the people who waited for you stopped waiting somewhere along the way without telling you. This is the loop, and most people live inside it for their entire lives without ever naming it. Now I want to take you one layer deeper, because there is something underneath the busyness that is even more uncomfortable to look at. It is not just avoidance of stillness. It is avoidance of self-confrontation. Because when you are truly present, you are not just present with the moment, you are present with yourself. And for many people, being with themselves is the thing they are most afraid of. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way they would even admit, but in the quiet way that shows up as restlessness whenever nothing external is demanding their attention. The Nafs, at its most unexamined, is driven by something very specific. It is driven by the desire to avoid the feeling of inadequacy, to keep moving so that you never have to stand still long enough to ask whether you are who you wanted to be, to stay occupied so that the gap between your ideals and your reality never has to be measured, because if you measured it, you might have to change, and change is threatening to the Nafs, because the Nafs is built on the familiar. It is built on what has worked before, even when what has worked before was not working. Let me show you what this looks like. You tell yourself you will read more, you will pray more, you will eat better, you will call your parents more often, you will be less reactive with the people you love, you will spend more time doing the things that actually give your life meaning and less time numbing yourself at the end of each day. You make this agreement with yourself, And for a day or two, you honor it, and then you do not. And you tell yourself it was because you were busy. You tell yourself the week was hard. You tell yourself you will start again Monday. You tell yourself a story about circumstances that made the promise impossible to keep. And the story is not entirely false. The circumstances were real. The week was difficult. The demands were genuine. But the Nafs is also very skilled at finding exactly the circumstances that justify the abandonment of the things that would most require you to grow. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. This is the Nafs operating exactly as it is designed to operate. It will always, always, always move toward comfort, toward the familiar, toward the path of least resistance. This is not a malfunction. This is the nature of the lower Nafs, what is called the Nafs al-Amara, the commanding self. The self that commands you toward what feels safe and away from what feels threatening. And the most threatening thing to this part of you is not failure. It is the possibility of becoming different. Because if you became different, if you actually changed, if you became the person who keeps their own promises and sits in stillness without panic and is fully present with the people they love, then you could no longer excuse yourself with who you used to be. You could no longer hide behind the story of the person who is trying but overwhelmed. You would have to arrive, and arrival is frightening in a way that is very hard to describe, because with arrival comes accountability, and the Nafs prefers motion to accountability every single time. So you stay busy, you stay in the productive middle distance, not failing, not arriving, perpetually on the way to somewhere that remains just slightly out of reach. And the Qalb watches all of this. The Qalb is not passive in this process. It does not simply observe, it signals, it sends messages, but they are not sent in the language of words or thoughts. They are sent in the language of feeling, in the feeling of emptiness after you get something you thought you wanted, in the feeling of flatness on the days that should feel significant, in the exhaustion that is not physical, the kind of tired that sleep does not fix, in the subtle grief that comes when you realize a whole season of your life passed and you were never quite in it. These are not random feelings. These are the Qalb saying something important is being neglected. And here is the thing about the Qalb. When it is repeatedly ignored, it does not get louder. It gets harder. This is what is described in the Quran, not as a metaphor, but as a real spiritual process. The Qalb that is repeatedly turned away from, repeatedly overruled by the Nafs, begins to harden, not in a way that makes you cruel, but in a way that makes you less permeable, less moved by things that should move you, less capable of the deep feeling that once came easily. You might have already noticed this in yourself. Things that used to matter, used to land, used to resonate, they no longer reach you the same way. And you wonder if you have changed. And the answer is yes, but not in the direction you hoped for. Hardening is not strength. Hardening is what happens when the Qalb is starved of presence, because the Qalb is nourished by attention, by genuine, unhurried attention to what is real, to what is true, to the actual texture of your experience, not the managed version of it. The Qalb is nourished by prayer that is not just performed, but inhabited, by a conversation where you are fully there, by a moment in nature where you are not photographing it or planning your next movement, but simply standing in it and allowing it to mean something, by presence. And this is what busyness takes from you, not just time, not just rest. It takes the moments in which the Qalb would have been fed, the moments that would have kept you soft, the moments that would have kept the channel between you and your own depth open and clear. Now here is something I want you to really sit with. Most people think presence is about slowing down. They think if I just do less, I will be more present. And sometimes that is true, but it is not the whole truth, because I know people who do very little and are still entirely absent, who sit in the same chair every day and are somewhere completely else. And I know people who live full, demanding lives and carry within them a kind of groundedness that is almost impossible to describe. The difference is not the pace. The difference is where the person is anchored. Because the nafs, when it runs unchecked, anchors you to one of two things: either the past, replaying, regretting, relitigating conversations and decisions that are finished, or the future, projecting, planning, worrying about outcomes that have not arrived and may never arrive in the form you imagine them. The nafs is almost never in the present, and this is not a coincidence. This is by design, because in the present moment, the nafs has very little to work with. The present moment is already happening. It cannot be strategized or avoided. It can only be experienced, and experiencing something fully, without the filter of what it means or what it leads to or how it compares to what you wanted, is something the nafs finds profoundly uncomfortable. The present is the territory of the ruh, and when you are truly in the present, even for a few seconds, you feel the ruh, not dramatically, not in a way that requires a special setting or a particular emotional state. You feel it in the sudden fullness of a moment that had no reason to be significant but was. In the way your child looked at you and you were actually looking back, not through the glass of your thoughts, but directly, genuinely there. In the way the adhan reached you one morning and something inside you that had been clenched for weeks quietly released. These are not small things. These are the real things. And they only happen in the present. Now I want to talk about something that goes even deeper. Something that I think is at the root of why so many people live in this state of perpetual busyness and perpetual absence. It is the belief that their worth is being produced, not stated, not held consciously, but operating silently beneath everything. The belief that you are valuable because of what you do, because of how much you handle, because of the quality of your output and the speed of your response and the size of what you manage. And because this belief runs so deep, stopping feels like disappearing. Slowing down feels like becoming less. Being present, fully and unhurriedly present in a single moment, feels like a waste. Because what is being produced in that moment? What is being accomplished? What can be pointed to at the end of it? This is the deepest wound of modern life, and it is almost entirely invisible because everyone around you shares it. The entire structure of the world you live in is built on this belief that productivity is virtue, that busyness is a sign of importance, that the person who is always available, always responsive, always in motion, is the person who is doing life correctly. But the nafs seized on this cultural truth and turned it into a personal trap. And so you work, and you respond, and you plan, and you deliver. And at the end of each day, even when you did everything right by the world's standards, something in you is unsatisfied. Not because you did too little, but because you were not there for any of it. You were in the task, but you were not in the life. You were in the accomplishment, but you were not in the moment of accomplishing it. And you wonder why fulfillment never seems to arrive. Fulfillment is not a destination. It is a quality of presence. You cannot be fulfilled in a life you are not actually inhabiting. The nafs will take everything you produce and immediately orient you toward the next thing. That is what it does. It is incapable of resting in what has been accomplished, because the accomplishment was never really the point. The motion was the point. The motion was the safety. And so each achievement becomes a door to the next demand. And the feeling you thought would come after, it passes through so quickly you almost miss it, until one day you stop expecting it to come at all, and you tell yourself you are just not someone who feels satisfied easily. You tell yourself you are built for more. You tell yourself this is ambition, this restlessness, this inability to be still. But it is not ambition. It is the nafs running because it does not know how to stop. There is a concept in the Islamic tradition of muraqabah. It is often translated as self-watching, or a quality of awareness in which the person becomes genuinely conscious of what is happening inside them, not judgmentally, not performatively, but with real, honest, quiet attention. Where am I right now? Where is my heart? Where is my attention being spent? What am I actually feeling beneath what I am showing? What is the Nafs pursuing? And is it leading me toward or away from what I actually value? This is not meditation in the Western sense. It is something more intimate than that. It is the practice of staying close to yourself, of not wandering so far into the noise that you forget what your own inner life sounds like. And the reason this practice matters, the reason it has been considered essential for centuries among those who took the human interior seriously, is precisely because of what happens without it. Without muraqabah, the nafs goes unobserved. And what goes unobserved in us goes unchecked. And what goes unchecked begins to direct. And what begins to direct eventually determines. And one day you look at your life and you recognize its shape, but you do not remember choosing it. You do not remember deciding, consciously and deliberately, to become this person who is always moving but never arriving. This person who has everything organized and nothing nourished. This person who is present for everything except the things that matter most. That is not a failure of character. That is what happens when the nafs is left to run unsupervised for long enough. And the correction is not dramatic. It does not require a retreat or a crisis or a complete restructuring of your life, though sometimes those things happen and they carry their own kind of gift. The correction begins with something much smaller. It begins with one honest moment where you stop performing presence and actually become present. Where you put down the phone not because someone told you to, but because you noticed what you were avoiding. Where you sit in the prayer not just moving through the positions, but actually standing before something, actually speaking from somewhere real. Where you look at someone you love and let yourself be looked at in return, without managing the moment, without being somewhere else inside, just one moment and then another, not as a practice of self-improvement, not as a strategy to be more productive or more mindful or more anything, but as an act of honesty. Because the Ruh does not require much to make itself known. It only requires that you stop drowning it out long enough to notice it is there. I want to tell you something that took me a long time to understand. The reason you feel most alive in your rarest moments of full presence is not because those moments are special. It is because those moments are real, and you are almost never real. You are almost always managed, curated, edited, running the version of yourself that handles things rather than the version of yourself that feels them. And that performance is exhausting in a way that sleep does not touch, because it is not your body that is tired. It is the effort of being somewhere else while pretending to be here. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it without reaching for an answer too quickly. When did you last feel genuinely rested? Not physically rested, not slept enough rested, but rested in the way that means I was exactly where I was, and that was enough, and I did not need to be anywhere else, and I did not need to produce anything or manage anything or become anything in that moment. I was simply there. And it was quiet inside, and for a little while the engine was off. When was that? For most people, this question lands somewhere between uncomfortable and devastating, because they cannot point to a recent memory, and they realize, perhaps for the first time with real clarity, that they have been running for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to stop. And they tell themselves they will stop when things calm down, when the project is finished, when the children are older, when the situation is more stable, when the pressure lifts, when there is more time. But things do not calm down. Projects finish and new ones begin. Children grow and new demands arrive. Stability is a horizon that moves at exactly the speed you walk toward it. And there is never more time. There is only this time. And this time is already becoming the past as you read this sentence. The Nafs is very patient. It will wait your entire life for the conditions to be perfect before it allows you to rest, and the conditions will never be perfect. This is not pessimism. This is one of the most liberating truths you can receive, because it means that if you wait for the right circumstances to finally be present, to finally be here, to finally give your full and unhurried attention to your life and the people in it, you will wait forever. Presence is not something you earn. It is not a reward for finishing. Presence is available right now, in this moment, exactly as things are. But the Nafs will fight you for it, because the Nafs thrives in the gap between now and later. It is built for the journey, not the arrival. And so it will always find a reason why now is not the moment, why you need just a little more time, why presence is a luxury that someone at your level of responsibility simply cannot afford. And this is the lie that the Nafs tells most convincingly. That presence is irresponsible. That being here is a kind of abandonment of everything that needs to be done. But the people who have arrived at the end of their lives and spoken honestly about what mattered, about what they wished they had done differently, they do not say, "I wish I had responded to more emails." They do not say, "I wish I had worked more hours." They do not say, "I wish I had worried more about the future." They say, "I wish I had been there. I wish I had actually been in the moments that were happening. I wish I had looked up more. I wish I had been less far away while I was physically close." They grieve the presence they never gave. Not the productivity, the presence. And here is something that the Islamic tradition understood with extraordinary depth, something that modern psychology is only beginning to articulate with its own vocabulary. That the human being is not primarily a producing entity, not primarily an achieving entity. The human being is first and most fundamentally a perceiving entity, a being that was created to notice, to witness, to receive the world and respond to it with full awareness. The Quran speaks again and again of people who have eyes but do not see, ears but do not hear, hearts that do not understand. This is not describing physical blindness or deafness. It is describing precisely what we are talking about. The condition of being physically present but internally absent, of going through the motions of a life without actually inhabiting it, of having been given everything needed for perception and spending it in distraction. And the warning is not a punishment. It is a description. This is what happens to a person who lets the Nafs run unchecked for long enough. The organs of perception, the Qalb above all, become less responsive, less alive, less capable of the kind of seeing that changes you. And you feel this? I think you already feel this. You feel it in the way things that should be beautiful land flat, in the way experiences you looked forward to feel smaller when they arrive, in the way time seems to be accelerating, weeks collapsing into each other, whole months passing without a single moment you can clearly retrieve, in the way you feel increasingly like an observer of your own life rather than someone who is actually living it. This is the cost of absence, paid in the currency of unlived moments, and there is no recovery of those moments. They do not return. The conversation that happened while you were in your head is gone. The afternoon your child wanted to play and you were too distracted is gone. The moment in prayer that passed while you were composing a work email in your mind is gone. But the next moment is not gone. This is the mercy that makes presence not just possible, but urgent. You cannot go back, but you can be here, fully here, now, not after you finish, not once things settle, not when you have finally caught up to wherever you are running, now. And this is where I want you to understand something about the Nafs that most conversations about self-improvement miss entirely. Because the common advice is, be more mindful, slow down, breathe. And these things are not wrong, but they do not address what is actually driving the absence. They treat the symptom, without touching the source. The source is not a bad habit of distraction. The source is an unresolved relationship with yourself. Because the reason you are rarely present is not only that the world is noisy. The world has always been noisy. The reason you are rarely present is that being present with yourself, truly and honestly present with what you actually feel and think and want and fear, is something that has become frightening. And so the noise becomes welcome. The busyness becomes shelter. The constant occupation of the mind becomes a way of avoiding the specific quality of awareness that would require you to see yourself clearly, not to judge yourself. Clarity is not judgment, but to see yourself as you actually are, not the version you present to the world, not the version you describe when someone asks how you are doing, not the version that is always fine and always managing and always on top of it. The actual version, the one that is sometimes confused, sometimes lonely in a crowd, sometimes uncertain about whether the direction is right, sometimes quietly devastated by the smallness of the gap between who you are becoming and who you once believed you would be. That version. The Nafs does not want you to see that version, because that version is vulnerable, and vulnerability to the Nafs is the same as danger. But to the Qalb, vulnerability is the beginning of truth, and to the Ruh, truth is the only atmosphere in which it can be felt. So when you run from yourself, when you stay busy to avoid the quality of honest self-seeing, you are not protecting yourself, you are preventing yourself, preventing the kind of internal clarity that could actually change something, preventing the kind of genuine encounter with your own depth that is, if we are honest, the only thing that has ever truly changed a person. Information does not change people. Understanding does not change people. Even good intentions do not change people. Presence changes people. Being fully in a moment with yourself, without the armor of productivity, without the distraction of the next thing, without the noise of constant occupation, and allowing what is true to be true, without immediately fixing it or explaining it or running from it. This changes people, because when you are fully present with the truth of where you are, something in you finally gets its bearings. The Qalb, which has been signaling and being ignored, finally has the space to be heard. And what it has been trying to say is usually not complicated. It is usually something quiet, something close. You are not where you want to be, and you know the direction, but you keep turning away. Now I want you to think about the person you were before the busyness fully took hold, before the speed of your current life became the only speed you knew. Who were you? What did you do with a free afternoon? What could hold your attention for an hour without you reaching for something else? What questions did you used to carry that you no longer have time for? Something happened to that person. Not a catastrophe, not a moment of decision, but a slow replacement. The world rewarded your speed and your output, and you gave more speed, more output, and gradually the pace that felt forced became normal, and the things that required slowness, patience, depth, genuine unhurried attention, they became luxuries you promised yourself you would return to one day. But the Nafs took the productivity and ran with it, and ran, and is still running. And somewhere inside, in the quietest part of the Qalb, there is something that remembers a different speed, a different quality of being in the world. Not lazy, not passive, not unproductive, but present, grounded, in contact with what is real, rather than perpetually managing what is next. That is not a memory of a better time. That is a signal pointing toward a truer way. And the path back is not through adding another thing to your routine. It is not through scheduling presence like you schedule a meeting. It is through subtraction, through noticing, one moment at a time, when you have drifted, when the body is here but the mind is elsewhere, when the conversation is happening but you are not in it, when the meal is in front of you but you are somewhere else entirely. And returning, not with drama, not with guilt, not with a speech to yourself about how you need to be better, just returning, here, now, this: the Nafs will drift you again, immediately. That is its nature, and you will return again, and it will drift, and you will return. And in that returning, over and over, something begins to change. Not dramatically, not visibly, but something in the Qalb softens, something in the interior quiets. The Ruh, which was always there, becomes slightly more perceptible, and you begin to live just a little more in the life that is actually happening rather than the life that is always about to begin. This is not a transformation. Do not wait for a transformation. Transformation is what the Nafs sells you when it wants to keep you oriented toward the future. This is something smaller and more honest than transformation. It is the simple, radical act of being here, in this body, in this moment, with this breath, with these people, in this imperfect and temporary and irreplaceable life. Not later, now. And I want to end where all of this began, with that person sitting at dinner, nodding at the right times, saying the right words, but absent, somewhere in the machinery of their thoughts, managing a life they are not quite living. That person is not failing. They are not broken. They are not too far gone. They are just running. And the running is not because they do not care. It is almost always because they care too much about too many things that the Nafs has convinced them require constant attention, and so nothing gets their full presence. Not the meal, not the conversation, not the prayer, not the mirror, not the moment before sleep when the day asks to be felt before it closes. Everything gets a portion of a divided person, and everyone senses it, including the person themselves. But here is what I want to leave you with. Not a technique, not a plan, not a call to restructure your life or overhaul your habits. Just this: the moment you are in right now is asking for something from you. Not everything, not a dramatic gesture, not a complete change, just your attention, just the particular quality of being here that you were created to give. And if you give it, even briefly, even imperfectly, even for the length of a single honest breath, something inside you will recognize it. And that recognition is not the beginning of a journey. That recognition is the arrival you have been too busy to notice you already reached. You were never missing presence. You were only missing the decision to stop leaving it.